There are moments in life that split everything into a before and an after. You don't always recognize them when they're happening. Sometimes they look like an ordinary Tuesday night dinner. Sometimes they look like your sister examining her manicure under the dining room light while she talks about herself for the third time in an hour. That was the night everything changed for me, and I didn't see it coming at all. I'd been pushing the same piece of roasted chicken around my plate for the better part of 20 minutes. Not because I wasn't hungry, but because eating required a kind of presence I couldn't quite summon. Christie was in the middle of one of her monologues, the kind that started with "So, I've been thinking," and ended somewhere around 45 minutes later, with everyone at the table feeling vaguely exhausted and slightly less certain of their own worth. She had this gift, my sister. She could make any room feel like a stage, and any conversation feel like an audition for a role in her life. She tilted her hand toward the overhead light, studying her nails with the focused appreciation of someone admiring a rare gemstone. Her nails were perfect, of course. Blush pink with a glossy topcoat, freshly done that afternoon at the salon she'd been going to since she was 16. Everything about Christie was always freshly done. Her hair, her skin, her outfit, her opinions. She maintained herself the way other people maintained expensive cars, with constant attention and significant financial investment, and she expected the people around her to notice. I noticed. I always noticed. That was the problem with growing up as Christie's sister. You spent so much time in her orbit that noticing her became involuntary, like breathing. My boyfriend Leon sat to my left, his phone balanced on his knee under the table, thumb scrolling in that absent, mechanical way that had become his default setting over the past several months. I could see the faint glow of the screen reflecting off the tablecloth. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. There had been a time, early in our relationship, when he would have at least pretended to be present. He would have made eye contact with me across the table, shared a private look that said we were in this together, that we were a team navigating the social obligations of family dinners with quiet solidarity. That time felt very far away. Across from me, Christie's boyfriend Mason sat with his arms folded across his chest, watching her with the particular expression of a man who has heard the same story so many times that he's stopped processing the words and started just waiting for the silence that follows. He was quiet in the way that people become quiet when they've learned that speaking up doesn't change anything. I'd always assumed Mason was boring. Christie had told me he was boring so many times that I'd absorbed it as fact without ever really examining it. He was just there, a fixture at these dinners, present but peripheral, like a piece of furniture that nobody particularly noticed. I was starting to reconsider that assessment. "So," Christie said, setting her hand down and looking around the table with the bright, expectant energy of someone about to deliver news they've been sitting on all day, "I have this idea. It's kind of crazy, but hear me out." Mason muttered something under his breath. It sounded like "here we go," delivered in the flat, resigned tone of a man who had long since stopped being surprised by anything his girlfriend said. Christie turned to look at him with an expression that could have curdled fresh milk. It was a look I knew well. The look that said she'd heard him, she'd registered the dismissal, and she was filing it away for later use. Mason didn't flinch. He just leaned back slightly in his chair and waited. The way you wait for a storm you can see coming from a long way off. "I think," Christie said, returning her attention to the table with the deliberate pacing of someone who has rehearsed this moment, "that you and I should swap boyfriends." The words landed in the middle of the table like something dropped from a great height. I blinked. Then I laughed, because there was genuinely no other response available to me. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when your brain encounters something so far outside the range of normal human behavior that it simply refuses to process it as real. I looked at Leon, expecting to find him laughing too, expecting to share that moment of mutual disbelief that couples share when the world briefly goes sideways. He wasn't laughing. He had finally looked up from his phone. He was watching Christie with an expression I hadn't seen on his face in months. Actual, genuine, undivided interest. The kind he used to look at me with, back when we were new and everything felt electric and possible. Something cold moved through me, slow and quiet, like a shadow crossing the sun. "I'm serious," Christie continued. She smiled the way she always smiled when she wanted something, that particular arrangement of her features that managed to look sweet and threatening at the same time, like a flower with thorns hidden in the petals. Think about it. Mason is so boring. She waved her hand in his direction without actually turning to look at him, the gesture of someone dismissing a minor inconvenience. No offense, babe. He never wants to do anything spontaneous. He just wants to stay home and watch movies and cook dinner. It's like dating a retirement home. Mason made a quiet sound that might have been a laugh. Better than dating a tornado that destroys everything and calls it excitement, he said. His voice was calm, measured, but there was something underneath it, a quiet edge that I hadn't heard from him before. Christie didn't acknowledge it. She continued as though he hadn't spoken, as though the words had simply passed through her without registering. "And Leon," she said, leaning forward and resting her chin in her hand, her eyes bright and focused. "He's adventurous. He's fun. He's always down to try new things. I just feel like we'd be way more compatible." It makes sense if you actually think about it. I stared at her. I was aware of my own heartbeat, steady and slightly too loud in my ears. "You're insane," I said. "I'm practical," she replied, without missing a beat. "Christie, that is genuinely the dumbest thing I have ever heard you say. And you once told me you thought the sun and the moon were the same object." "I was 12, she snapped, and stopped deflecting. "I'm offering you an upgrade." She gestured toward Mason with the casual confidence of someone presenting a prize on a game show. Mason raised one eyebrow but said nothing. "Why should we both be stuck in relationships that don't fit when we could just trade? It's not like any of us are married, Bailey. We're adults. We can make adult decisions. Why don't you just break up with Mason if you want to be with someone else?" I asked. "Why does this have to involve me at all?" She waved her hand again, that dismissive flutter that meant she'd already considered and discarded whatever I was about to say. "Because this is cleaner. This way nobody gets hurt. It's just a rearrangement. Nobody gets hurt," I repeated. I looked at Mason. He was looking at the table. Leon cleared his throat. The sound was small and careful, the sound of someone choosing their words. "I mean," he said slowly, "it's not the worst idea." The cold thing inside me spread outward, filling my chest, my throat, the backs of my hands. I turned to look at him so fast my neck cracked. "Excuse me," he shrugged. One of those loose, careless shrugs that I had once found endearing and now found infuriating. The shrug of someone who has decided that your feelings are not quite worth the effort of a real response. "What? I'm just saying. Might be fun to try something different. We've been together 2 years, Bailey. Things get stale." "Stale," I said. The word came out flat and hard, like something dropped on concrete. "Yeah. Don't act like you haven't noticed." I had noticed. Of course I had noticed. I'd noticed the way he stopped reaching for my hand in public. I'd noticed the way he'd started sleeping on the far edge of the bed, a careful distance between us that grew a little wider every week. I'd noticed the way he answered my questions with single syllables and looked at his phone during movies and forgot things I'd told him 3 times. I'd noticed all of it. I just believed, with the particular stubbornness of someone who has invested 2 years of their life in something, that it was a phase, that we'd find our way back to each other, that the distance was temporary. I hadn't imagined he'd use it as a reason to trade me in for my sister. Christie clapped her hands together with the bright energy of someone who has just watched a negotiation go their way. "See? Leon gets it. Come on, Bailey. 1 month. That's all I'm asking. If it doesn't work out, we switch back and forget it ever happened. No harm done." "No," I said. "Why not?" "Because it's crazy. Because you're my sister. Because this isn't a Netflix movie. Pick a reason." She rolled her eyes with theatrical exasperation. "God, you're so dramatic. It's not that serious. Mason doesn't care." She looked at him with the expectant brightness of someone who has already decided what the answer will be. "Right, babe? Tell her you don't care." Mason looked directly at me. His expression was difficult to read, layered with things I couldn't quite name. Exhaustion, maybe. Something that might have been amusement. Something that might have been pity. "Whatever makes this dinner end faster," he said. Christie beamed as though he'd just declared his undying support. She reached into her designer purse, the one that cost more than my monthly rent, and produced a folded piece of paper with the practiced ease of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. She unfolded it and smoothed it flat on the table with both hands. "I even drafted a little contract," she said. "1 month minimum. No backing out early. No running to mom and dad. We all agreed to give it a real shot." She slid the paper across the table toward me. "Come on, Bailey. Live a little. Unless you're scared Mason won't like you." There it was. The trap, perfectly constructed, delivered with a smile. I saw it the second she said it. I'd been watching Christie set traps my entire life. I knew exactly how they worked. She found the thing you were most uncertain about, the soft place where your confidence was thinnest, and she pressed on it just hard enough to make you react. She'd been doing it since we were children. She knew every single one of my buttons because she'd spent 30 years mapping them. The smart move was to stand up, to push back my chair, take Leon by the arm, and walk out of this dinner and never speak of this ridiculous idea again. To refuse to play the game entirely, but Leon was already reaching for the pen. "Leon," I said. My voice came out sharp and clear. "Don't you dare." He signed his name without hesitation, without glancing at me, without pausing for even a fraction of a second to consider what he was doing or what it meant. He signed his name like I wasn't sitting right there beside him, like 2 years of shared life amounted to nothing more than a minor inconvenience he was finally free to set aside. "Relax, babe," he said, sliding the paper toward Christie. "It's just a month. Might be good for us. Shake things up. Might be good for us." As though the problem was something we shared equally. As though the stagnation he'd created through his own absence and indifference was somehow a mutual failure that required a mutual solution. As though I was the reason things had gone wrong. My vision blurred at the edges, not with tears, with anger, the kind of anger that comes from somewhere deep and old, from years of excusing and accommodating and shrinking yourself to fit into the space someone else has decided you deserve. 2 years of watching him check out of conversations and forget important dates and make me feel like wanting his attention was somehow unreasonable. 2 years of telling myself it would get better, that he was just going through something, that the person I'd fallen in love with was still in there somewhere. And this was how it ended, not with a conversation, not with honesty, with a pen and a piece of paper at a dinner table, signed without a second thought. Christie signed next. Her signature as large and dramatic as everything else about her, all sweeping loops and unnecessary flourishes. Then Mason signed with a quick, economical scrawl, still wearing that expression of mild, detached amusement, like a man watching a play he'd already seen. They all turned to look at me. "Bailey," Christie said, her voice wrapped in sweetness that I could taste the poison underneath. "Don't be the only one who ruins this. I should have walked away. I know that now. I knew it then, in some quiet part of myself that was still thinking clearly. I should have told all 3 of them exactly what I thought of them, and their contract and their ridiculous arrangement. And I should have walked out that door and never looked back. But Leon had signed that paper like he'd been waiting for an escape hatch. Like he'd been holding his breath for months, waiting for someone to give him permission to leave. And something about that, something about the casual ease of his betrayal, made me refuse to be the one left behind. Made me refuse to be the pathetic one, the one who begged, the one who cried and pleaded while everyone else moved on. I grabbed the pen. I signed my name in hard, angry strokes that tore slightly at the paper. Then I threw the pen onto the table with enough force that it bounced twice and skittered off the edge. Christie smiled, that perfect, practiced smile that had never once, in all the years I'd been watching it, reached her eyes. "Trust me," she said. "This is going to be the best thing that ever happened to you." She had absolutely no idea how right she was. I drove home that night with my hands tight on the steering wheel. I replayed the dinner in my head on a loop. The way Leon's eyes had lit up when Christie made her proposal. The way he'd reached for that pen without even glancing at me. The way he'd said might be good for us, like I was the problem that needed solving. I replayed it until the anger burned itself down to something quieter and more dangerous, something that felt like clarity. I had given 2 years of my life to a man who had just signed away our relationship at a dinner table without a moment's hesitation. And I had signed the same paper, not because I wanted to, but because I refused to be the only one left standing in the wreckage looking foolish. I didn't sleep much that night. Mason texted me 2 days later. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, staring at nothing in particular, when my phone buzzed. I picked it up and read the message twice before I believed it was real. "Hey, figured we should actually talk since we're stuck together for a month." Coffee? I stared at it for a full minute. I turned it over in my mind, looking for the angle, the trap, the Christie-shaped manipulation hidden somewhere in the simple words. But there was nothing there, just a straightforward suggestion from a person who had apparently decided that if they were going to be thrown together by circumstance, they might as well be civil about it. I typed back sure before I could talk myself out of it. We agreed to meet at a cafe roughly equidistant between our apartments. Neutral territory, which felt appropriate given the circumstances. I arrived 15 minutes early, ordered a latte I didn't particularly want just to have something to hold, and chose a table in the corner where I could see the door. I sat there watching people come and go and tried to remember the last time I'd done something like this. Met someone new, started something from scratch, without the weight of history and expectation pressing down on every word. When Mason walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. Every time I'd seen him before, he'd been sitting next to Christie, occupying the particular posture of someone who has learned to make themselves small. Shoulders slightly rounded, eyes slightly downcast, the body language of a person who has been told, in 100 small ways, that they take up too much space. Now he walked through the door wearing a simple black t-shirt and jeans, hands in his pockets, and he looked like an entirely different person, relaxed, unburdened, like someone who had just set down something very heavy and was still getting used to the lightness. He spotted me and gave a small wave, then crossed the room and sat down across from me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was aware of itself. Two people who had been thrown together by someone else's scheme, trying to figure out what to do with the situation they'd been handed. Then he laughed quietly and shook his head. "This is weird, right?" he said. "It's not just me, it's extremely weird." I agreed. I keep waiting for Christie to pop out from behind a plant and tell me this was all some elaborate prank. That would require her to admit she was wrong about something, Mason said. "So we're safe." I snorted. I couldn't help it. It came out before I could stop it, that involuntary laugh that happens when something is funny in a way you weren't expecting. He smiled a little, and I realized I had never actually seen him smile before. Not once in the entire year Christie had been dating him. I'd seen him sit through dinners and nod at appropriate intervals and occasionally offer a quiet observation that Christie talked over, but I had never seen him smile. It changed his whole face. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair with the ease of someone who has decided to stop performing, "how are you holding up with the whole Leon situation?" I wrapped both hands around my cup and thought about how to answer that. The honest answer was that I'd spent the past 2 days cycling between rage and humiliation, replaying the dinner on a loop, alternating between wanting to throw things and wanting to cry. The polished answer was that I was fine, handling it maturely, moving forward with grace and equanimity. I went with honest. "I keep replaying it," I said. "The way he just signed that paper without even looking at me, like I was already gone in his mind. Like the decision had already been made and the dinner was just the formality." Mason nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "That was rough to watch." "Was it obvious?" I asked. "From the outside, I mean, that things were bad between us?" He considered the question with the careful attention of someone who takes questions seriously. "I don't know if bad is the right word," he said finally. "It was more like he wasn't fully there. Every time I saw you two together, he was either on his phone or looking somewhere else. You'd be talking and he'd be checked out. I noticed because..." He stopped himself. "Because what?" He looked at his coffee cup for a moment. "Because Christie does the same thing to me," he said. "Different flavor, but the same energy. She's not checked out exactly. She's just waiting for her turn to talk. Every conversation is just her waiting for an opening, to bring it back to herself. The TED Talk thing, I said. Exactly. He looked up. I used to think maybe I was boring. She told me I was boring so many times that I started to believe it. But then I realized she called everything boring that wasn't directly about her. A movie she didn't pick? Boring. A restaurant that wasn't Instagram-worthy? Boring. Me wanting to spend a night cooking dinner instead of going to some overpriced club? Boring. She called you a retirement home at dinner, I said. That was a new one, actually. Usually it's grandpa or old man or... I paused, remembering. My personal favorite, why are you so obsessed with being comfortable? He looked at me with an expression of startled recognition. She says that to you too? She says it to anyone who doesn't want to be in constant motion, I said. Comfort is her least favorite concept. It means things have stopped being about her. He did the voice then, Christie's voice, that particular pitch and cadence she used when she was performing exasperation. Why are you so obsessed with being comfortable? It was pitch perfect, and I laughed harder than I'd meant to, harder than I'd laughed in months. The kind of laugh that comes from somewhere genuine and releases something you didn't know you were holding. She's exhausting, I said, when I'd recovered. I love her because she's my sister, but God, she's exhausting. She's a black hole, Mason said. Everything gets pulled into her orbit. Your time, your energy, your money. He paused. I spent $800 on a purse for her birthday. She returned it because it wasn't the right shade of beige. $800. I looked at him. $800, I repeated. She showed me the exact one she wanted. I bought it. Apparently there's a meaningful difference between sand and oatmeal, and I should have known that. Leon forgot my birthday last year, I said. Completely forgot. I reminded him the week before and the day before, and he still forgot. Then he got mad at me for being upset because birthdays aren't that serious. Christie made me throw her a surprise party, Mason said, and then got mad that I invited her friends instead of people who would make her look better. I stared at him. What does that even mean? I still don't know, he said. I've thought about it many times. I genuinely cannot decode it. It means she wanted hot friends for photos, I said. Her friends are hot. Not hot enough, apparently. Not hot enough, he repeated, and we both laughed again, and something shifted between us in that moment. The awkwardness dissolved. The careful politeness of two strangers thrown together by circumstance gave way to something more honest, the easy recognition of two people who had been through the same war and were comparing their scars. Can I be honest with you? Mason asked. Please, I said. He turned his coffee cup in his hands, looking at it rather than at me. When Christie brought up the swap, I wasn't surprised. I was relieved. He said the word carefully, like he was still getting used to admitting it. I've been trying to find an exit for months, but every time I brought up breaking up, she'd cry, or she'd threaten to tell everyone I was emotionally abusive, or she'd say she'd hurt herself. He paused. I was trapped. My stomach turned. Mason, that's manipulation. Yeah, I know. But when you're in it, you don't see it clearly. You just feel guilty all the time and you don't know why. You keep trying to figure out what you did wrong, what you could do differently, how you could be better. And the answer is always just more of you. More time, more attention, more money, more patience. It's never enough. He ran a hand through his hair. Anyway, I signed that contract because it was the first door she'd opened willingly. Even if it's only a month, it's a month where I don't have to pretend anymore. I understood that more than I wanted to admit. Leon made me feel like I was asking for too much, I said quietly. Wanting him to pay attention to me was needy. Expecting him to remember things was demanding. I kept shrinking myself to fit into whatever space he left for me, and it was never enough. I kept thinking if I just asked for less, if I just needed less, eventually he'd have enough left over to actually be present. We both picked wrong, Mason said. We really did. He smiled again, that small, quiet smile that softened his whole face. Silver lining, at least we're stuck with each other now instead of them. Is that a silver lining? I guess we'll find out. I smiled back, and for the first time since that disaster of a dinner, I felt something other than anger. I felt seen. Not performed at, not managed, not tolerated, seen. "Hey," I said, "random question. What do you do for work?" I realized I don't actually know anything about you. Christie never talked about you unless she was complaining. Something flickered across his face. Not discomfort exactly, more like the expression of someone deciding how much to share, weighing the options, calculating the risk. "I actually just quit my job," he said, "about 3 weeks ago." "Oh." I kept my expression neutral. So how had he afforded the $800 purse without blinking? Was he living off savings? Was there family money? I filed the question away and waited. "Are you looking for something new?" Or, "Not exactly." He took a long sip of his coffee, set the cup down, looked at me with the expression of someone about to say something they know sounds absurd. "I quit because I don't really need to work anymore." He paused and laughed. A short, slightly disbelieving sound, like he still hadn't fully processed it himself. "This is going to sound insane." "Okay," I said. "I won the lottery." The words sat there between us. "Like actually won," he continued. "Not like $100. I mean, I won millions." I choked on my latte. Coffee went down the wrong pipe, and I spent the next 30 seconds coughing, while Mason handed me napkins with a mildly concerned expression of someone who had not anticipated this particular reaction. "Sorry," he said. "I probably should have led with that." "You probably should have," I wheezed. I pressed a napkin to my mouth and stared at him. "Millions." "Yeah, millions plural. And Christie doesn't know. Nobody knows. I haven't told anyone." He looked at me steadily. "I didn't tell Christie because..." He stopped and waited, watching my face with the patient expression of someone who has already connected the dots and is waiting for you to catch up. "I connected them instantly. Because she'd never let you go," I said. "Because she'd never let me go," he confirmed. "She'd suddenly love everything about me. The staying home, the cooking, the comfortable, quiet life. All of it would become perfect the second she found out there was money attached. The retirement home would become a palace. The boring would become charming. The grandpa would become distinguished." He said it without bitterness, just the flat certainty of someone who knows exactly how a particular story ends. I know her. I know exactly how that conversation would have gone. I sat back in my chair and looked at him. This man my sister had thrown away because he wasn't exciting enough. This man she'd called boring and safe and compared to a retirement home, who she'd dismissed with a wave of her hand at a dinner table while she pursued something shinier. He was sitting across from me in a simple black t-shirt, drinking coffee, and he was a millionaire. And she had absolutely no idea. "She's going to lose her mind," I said. Mason's jaw tightened slightly. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know. The thing about knowing something is coming and actually watching it arrive is that the knowing doesn't prepare you as much as you think it will. I knew Christie was going to find out eventually. I knew it was going to be catastrophic. I knew her well enough to understand that the combination of having missed something and having thrown it away herself was going to produce a reaction that would make every previous Christie meltdown look like a minor inconvenience. I just didn't expect it to happen quite so soon. Mason called his mother a week after our coffee. I was sitting next to him on his couch, my feet tucked under me, half watching something on television that neither of us was really paying attention to, when he picked up his phone and dialed. I could tell from the way he sat up slightly, the way his whole posture changed, that this was a call he'd been looking forward to. "Hey, Mom," he said. And then, after a pause, "You and Dad never have to worry about the house again." I watched his face as he listened to whatever was happening on the other end of the line. His expression opened up in a way I hadn't seen before, something unguarded and genuine, the face of someone experiencing a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. I could hear, faintly, the sound of crying from the phone. Happy tears, the kind that come from relief so profound it has nowhere else to go. It was one of the most genuine things I'd ever witnessed. I felt something warm move through my chest watching it. What neither of us realized was that Christie had let herself in. She still had a key to Mason's apartment. She'd refused to give it back when the swap started, claiming she needed to collect some things she'd left behind, and Mason hadn't pushed the issue, because pushing issues with Christie always cost more than it was worth. So she had a key, and she used it, and she was standing in the hallway when she heard him say those words. The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then someone screamed. It was a sound I'd heard before, in a different register, the sound Christie made when something she wanted was being taken away from her. But this was louder. This was the sound of someone who had just watched a door close on something they hadn't known they wanted until the moment it was gone. She came through the living room like a force of nature, designer heels clicking against the hardwood, eyes wild and darting, her whole face arranged in the particular expression of someone whose world has just been rearranged without their permission. "How?" she demanded. Her voice was high and sharp and slightly unhinged. "How did you pay off a mortgage, Mason? That's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Where did you get that kind of money?" Mason ended the call with his mother. He stood up slowly, and I watched him take a breath, the breath of someone who has been waiting for a particular moment and is now deciding how to meet it. "Christie," he said, "you need to leave. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what the hell is going on." Her eyes moved to me, then back to him, then to me again, like she was trying to solve an equation that kept changing. "You work a normal job. You drive a 10-year-old car. You told me you couldn't afford to take me to Cabo for my birthday. And now you're paying off mortgages. It's none of your business," Mason said. His voice was calm, but I could see his hands, and his hands were not calm. "We're not together anymore. Remember? You made sure of that." Christie's head snapped toward me with the speed and precision of something predatory. "You," she said. The word came out like an accusation. You knew this whole time, didn't you? That's why you agreed to sign the contract so easily. You knew he had money and you played me." I felt the absurdity of it wash over me like a wave. "Are you hearing yourself right now? You proposed the swap. You wrote the contract. You brought a pen to dinner, Christie. You pushed and pushed until everyone signed. I didn't even want to be part of this. There's no way this is a coincidence," she insisted. Her voice was climbing higher with every sentence, the pitch of someone whose narrative is collapsing around them and who is desperately trying to rebuild it in real time. "You must have found out somehow. Maybe you went through his things. Maybe you hacked his bank account. I don't know how, but you knew, and you stole him from me." "I didn't steal anyone," I said. "You threw him away. You literally handed him to me on a silver platter because you wanted my neglectful, checked-out boyfriend instead. That was your choice, Christie. Nobody made you do that." "I didn't have all the information," she screamed. If you had known he was rich, you would have pretended to love him," I finished. "That's exactly why he didn't tell you. He knew you'd only want him for his money. And look at you right now, proving him right." Christie's face went through several colors in rapid succession. She looked like she was about to say something, then like she was about to cry, then like she was about to say something else entirely. For a moment, nothing came out at all. For once in her life, Christie had nothing to say. She grabbed her purse. She walked to the door. She slammed it behind her with enough force that a picture frame fell off the wall and shattered on the floor. I looked at Mason. He looked at me. We both looked at the broken frame. "Well," I said. "Yeah," he said. "I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong about that in the way you're wrong about things when you've underestimated someone's capacity for escalation." My phone started ringing the next morning before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. I let it go again. The third time, I answered. "Bailey." My mother's voice had that particular quality it got when she was trying to sound neutral and failing. "Christie called an emergency family meeting. You need to come home. Right now. No excuses." I drove to my parents' house with the specific dread of someone walking into a situation they already understand completely. I knew what I was going to find. I knew the staging, the props, the emotional choreography. Christie had been performing this particular production since she was old enough to understand that tears were a form of currency. She was already in position when I walked in, curled on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders, tissues scattered artfully around her, eyes red and swollen with what I was certain was strategically timed crying. My mother sat beside her, rubbing her back with the gentle, worried attention of someone who has been convinced that a crisis is occurring. My father stood by the fireplace with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who has been pulled into something he doesn't fully understand and isn't sure he wants to. "Bailey," my mother said, in the soft, disappointed voice she reserved for moments when she believed I'd done something wrong. "We need to talk about the situation with Mason." "Let me guess," I said. "Christie told you her version and now I'm the bad guy." "No one said that," my mother said. "Your sister is hurting." Christie produced a theatrical sob on cue. "I just want things to go back to normal," she whimpered. "I made a mistake. I admit it. I should never have suggested the swap. But Bailey is rubbing it in my face and refusing to switch back, and it's not fair." "A mistake," I repeated. "You planned this for weeks. You drafted an actual contract. You brought a pen to dinner, Christie." "I didn't know what I was giving up," she wailed. "He kept things from me. He hid who he really was. How was I supposed to make a fair decision without all the information? So now it's his fault you treated him like garbage?" "Bailey, please," my mother said. "She's your sister. She's going through something terrible right now." I stopped at the door but didn't turn around. "She went through something terrible because of choices she made. I'm not responsible for that. She needs her family. She needs to sit with what she did," I said. "That's not the same thing." I walked. Mason drove. I stared out the window and watched the streetlights blur past and tried to locate some feeling inside myself that resembled grief or loss or even anger. There was nothing. Just a strange, clean emptiness, like a room that had been cleared out and swept. "You okay?" Mason asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. I thought finding out the truth would feel like something. Like it would make me angrier, or sadder, or more justified. But I just feel. I searched for the word. "Done." "Done is okay," he said. "Done means you're finished carrying something that was never yours to carry." I looked at him. The streetlights moved across his face in slow, even intervals. She planned the whole thing, weeks of planning. She was talking to Leon behind my back for a month before that dinner. She drafted the contract. She rehearsed it with him. And the whole time I was sitting in my relationship wondering what I was doing wrong, wondering why he felt so far away. It was because he was already somewhere else. "You didn't do anything wrong," Mason said. "I know that now." I turned back to the window. I think I knew it before, somewhere underneath all the excusing I was doing. But knowing it and believing it are different things. He reached over and took my hand without saying anything. I let him. We didn't talk for the rest of the drive. We didn't need to. The month ended 3 days later. The contract Christie had written with such careful, deliberate precision, the one she'd brought to dinner in her designer purse with a pen already in hand, the one she'd used to trap me, expired quietly on a Tuesday afternoon. Neither Mason nor I mentioned it. There was nothing to mention. The contract had been Christie's architecture, built to serve Christie's purposes, and it had collapsed under the weight of everything she'd set in motion. What Mason and I had built in that month had nothing to do with her terms and conditions. It had been built in a kitchen at midnight with overcooked pasta. It had been built on a couch watching terrible horror movies. It had been built in a clinic waiting room where he held my hand and told me we'd figure it out together. It didn't need a contract. It didn't need a deadline. It just needed to be what it already was. My mother called a week later. Not to guilt me, not to summon me to another intervention. Just to talk. She told me Christie had started seeing a therapist, that she was on medication now, managing things, that she'd asked about me but hadn't pushed. My mother's voice was careful and tired, the voice of a woman trying to hold 2 daughters at the same time without losing either of them. "I'm not ready to talk to her," I said. "I know," my mother said. "I'm not asking you to be. I might be someday. I know that too." We talked for a while about other things. Small things. The kind of conversation we used to have before everything got complicated. It felt like finding a door I'd thought was locked. Leon, as far as I knew, had moved on. He'd sent me one text, 2 weeks after the clinic, that said simply, "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything." I read it 3 times and then put my phone down and didn't respond. There was nothing to say that would have been worth saying. Some things don't need a response. Some things just need to be acknowledged and set down. Mason and I moved in together 4 months later. It wasn't a dramatic decision. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was just the natural conclusion of two people who had already been living in each other's spaces and realized there was no good reason to keep maintaining the pretense of separate addresses. He cooked dinner the night we finished moving the last of my boxes in. Nothing fancy. Pasta, the same recipe his grandmother had taught him, the one I'd overcooked twice before getting right. We ate it on the living room floor because neither of us wanted to bother with the table, and it tasted exactly the way it had the first time. "You know," I said, twirling pasta around my fork, "if Christie hadn't proposed that swap, none of this would have happened." Mason considered that. If Christie hadn't proposed the swap, I'd still be trapped in a relationship I couldn't get out of, and you'd still be shrinking yourself to fit into a space that was too small for you. "So we owe her," I said. "I wouldn't go that far." I laughed. He smiled. Outside the window, the city moved through its ordinary evening, indifferent and continuous, the way cities do. Christie had been right about one thing. Standing at that dinner table with her practiced smile and her folded contract and her absolute certainty that she was the smartest person in any room she entered, this was the best thing that ever happened to me. She just hadn't understood that the best thing wasn't getting what she wanted. The best thing was losing it.